Ian, your story about the pilot reminded me of, I was once, many years ago, at a dinner where Bishop Tutu told the story of how he flew in a plane with huge turbulence somewhere in Africa. And he started praying, please, God, let the pilot be white. And the next minute he prayed, please, God, forgive me. So I think that is what Ian and the book was trying to cover, is we need to admit to our vulnerabilities. First thing in racial healing. So I'm not going to say too much about myself. I had the pleasure and privilege to accompany Ian on this racial healing journey and to start building a human bridge with the pleasure also of having 11 collaborators. Yes, Lukhanyo, we call them collaborators. And we have one of our collaborators here, Lukhanyo Kalata. Thank you for being here, Lukhanyo, and we'd love to hear your words a little bit later. But I must add that, and I'm just going to talk to you about my insights and experience while writing the book with Ian and doing some research. And I must say, at times, it was also a little bit of a painful experience because it required one to dig very deep into one's own weaknesses and blind spots and vulnerabilities. And if you read the book, as several of our collaborators remarked, in South Africa these days, it is very hard to find any self-proclaimed racists on the street. And yet, in each and every one of us, there is some contamination to a smaller or a larger degree. We are contaminated by our biases, our prejudices, our fears, our resentments, our angers, regardless of the color of our skin. And this is caused by our respective histories and the way in which we were brought up. And I came to the insight, and this is incidentally also my pet subject in terms of research over recent years, and that is that most of us grew up in the world of or with capitals, where things are black or white, good or bad, us or them, past or future, and so we can go on. And as somebody once said, you cannot play a leading role in any complex situation where your choices are always limited to one of two. And that is the problem. We are driven by rules that says yes or no, right or wrong, black or white. Racial healing is not only a black versus white problem. There are many shades in between that matters. So I have realized, and I think we both have realized, that in racial healing we need to enter the world of and, both and. Yin and yang. There's good and bad in each and every one of us, also regardless of the color of our skin. And it's only once we realize that we can start constructing the human bridge. But it's amazing how few people are willing to acknowledge that, to admit to their own fears, and just like Tutu did, just like Ian did, to make ourselves vulnerable and say, hell, I was racist there, or I had my prejudices there, or whatever. We don't do that. And that is the problem. So I've come to the conclusion with Ian, after writing the book, that knowing ourselves, and that's what Ian said from the beginning in his fantastic first chapter, which makes the book, is that knowing ourselves, understanding our own vulnerabilities, is the heartbeat of racial healing. And it's the building blocks of the human bridge. Racial healing is about confronting and harnessing our own demons. And I think that's what Leon Wessel said so well in his essay. It's about unlearning our own racial stereotypes. Ultimately, that is the way in which we can psychologically empower ourselves. Racial healing is a form of psychological empowerment. But, therefore, racial healing is not easy. It's not the soft stuff, as Ian often said. It's damn hard work. It's a lifelong journey. It is an exercise in complexity and an acknowledgement of complexity where one single truth can never prevail. Now, if we look around us, it seems that racism and also ethnocentrism have become pervasive around the world, especially if we look at other countries where the ugly underbelly of racism and ethnocentrism is exposed for the world to see as we speak. We see it in American Trump rhetoric and electioneering. We see it in UK rioting. We see it in other conflict-ridden areas in the world. So one may well ask, and we got these questions, will that ever change? Why are you tackling these issues? Well, let's put it this way. It may be ambitious, but South Africa is a very good place to start. And Morris Mtombeni, Dean of the Business School, said South Africa is uniquely qualified to embark on this journey of racial healing. Given our history, we managed with relatively little bloodshed to overcome one of the most evil systems in the world, described as a crime against humanity, of which Lukhanyo and his family were very much victims and touched deeply by that. I think the fact that we can speak tonight to each other is already symbolic of the potential and power of racial healing in this country. So we managed to overcome that. We managed to establish a new democratic system, a constitution, and to carry on. But the point is, this legacy of apartheid still lingers. This is why we write the book. Because the damage that apartheid had left in its wake, despite the change in structure and system, are the things that still sit with us, as Jonathan Jansen described in his essays, and which, as we speak, is still rearing its ugly head in our schools. We all know it was written about racism in schools very recently, on our campuses, very much in the workplace, which Ian has coalface experience of, in our institution and in our politics. I mean, just read the paper today and understand how race and racism plays a role in our party politics. And this is 30 years after the abolishment of apartheid. And I want to say that these things will also be decisive in the sustainability of the GNU going forward. I think what people do not realize is that the GNU will be the outcome of a process, and the sustainability of the GNU will be determined by the relationships between the various stakeholders, the parties in that system. So we need to deal with these things by sweeping in front of our doorstep first, tackling the elephant in the room, and by beginning to talk to others, not through others, as Leon Wessels remarked, and by familiarizing ourselves sufficiently with each other's cultural histories, as Max de Pree and Mabali Baduza and Sylvester and Padma Mudli have asked. We need, for instance, I think, to introduce racial healing in our schools, in our curricula, in the workplace, in reverse mentoring, in radical candor. It's not just a talk shop, it's not a soft skill. There are many phases of racial healing, beginning with the individual, with narrative change, and then going into the community, then into institutions and into the system, bottom up and top down. And there's value change and there's culture change, and ultimately there's system change. So I want to conclude by the observation that Ian and I have often discussed. And we believe that the mistake that has been made in the past is the idea that if systems and structures are changed, the relationships between the parts that make up the system will also change. We think not. Relationships are everything. And for those of you who study complexity theory, they will say the relationship between the parts are more important than the parts themselves, more important than the system, because the relationships make the system. So you've got to begin with the relationships before you can fix the systems. Otherwise, the systems will become stuck. And I think our systems in South Africa, and I think this is what the book, our political, our economical system, have become stuck. Because, yes, we could change the systems, but we failed to pay attention to the relationships. So, as we are embarking into a new era in South Africa and the new system called the GNU, I think it will behoove us to remember all of these things. And that's the contribution that the book wants to make.